A good Friday morning to you, and thanks for joining us here on KARE 11 News Now. I'm Alicia Lewis. If you have to go out today at all, be sure to bundle up. Dangerous cold has settled in across Minnesota, with some temperatures dropping as far as negative 50 degrees wind chill. We're going to check in with our weather team in just a little bit. If you do plan on braving the cold today, we have coverage this morning to help you get prepared. So let's start things off with Audrey Russo, who's in the KARE 11 backyard.
In these bitterly cold temperatures, Xcel Energy is encouraging folks to have a cold weather plan in order to optimize the heat that's already in your house and also maybe save a little money in the process. So you start obviously with some of the obvious things, closing the damper in your fireplace to avoid some of the chilly air getting into your house, using a caulk or a weatherproof sealant, some of those plastic strips, in order to seal up cracks under your doors and other places in your house. Then you move on to things that maybe you might not think about. So with windows in your house, if you've got blinds, open them up during the day if it's sunny outside to let some of those rays in. Then when nighttime falls or it gets a little cloudy, close them back up, seal that heat from the sun in. Then you want to also think about something that's maybe a little counterintuitive at first, but it does make sense, lowering your thermostat about 7 to 10 degrees at night. You're already in bed, you're already snuggled up. It'll also help save money, and it could prevent a power surge that could lead to outages. You know, obviously a lot of people want to crank the thermostat and call it a day, but during the overnight hours, we were actually tracking an outage in Stearns County. About 1,000 people were without power during those bitterly cold nighttime hours. Fortunately, that resolved by around 5:30 this morning, so good news there, but really it's all about saving money, saving power, and making sure that your house is as optimized for the cold weather as possible. Back to you.
And the cold, canceling a few events over the weekend. In Minneapolis, organizers for the U.S. Pond Hockey Championships canceled all of today's games. The 2026 Lake Harriet Kite Festival also canceled. Over in St. Paul, outdoor events for the Winter Carnival are canceled for today. That includes the outdoor ice bar, the food truck festival. Indoor events, however, are still going on as planned. Organizers say nothing's been canceled so far for Saturday and Sunday. Well, happening today, hundreds of local businesses are shutting their doors to protest ICE operations across the state. Local faith leaders and labor groups organized a strike against ICE, calling for an economic blackout. Organizers say more than 700 businesses plan to take part, urging Minnesotans not to shop, work, or attend school today. Michael's Pizza in St. Paul tells us they'll stay open today to pay their staff and to help customers who need them.
We have some community members and some customers that are elderly, disabled, they're unable to leave their homes, and being mainly a delivery business, we felt it was important to continue that.
This morning, 3 Twin Cities activists remain in jail and face federal charges after a protest at a St. Paul church last weekend. One of them is high-profile activist Nekima Levy Armstrong. Also arrested, St. Paul School Board member Chantil Allen and William Kelly. Federal officials say the group committed a civil rights crime by interfering with people's ability to freely practice their religion. If convicted, they could face jail time. The activists say they protested at the church because one of its pastors also leads the local ICE office. Their attorney argues this isn't a legitimate case, calling it politically motivated.
This was brought from Washington, D.C. by the people on the top of the government solely for political reasons.
Now, the judge ordered the group to be released until their trial. The Department of Justice, however, appealing that order. It's unclear how long they'll stay in custody. And this case is getting national attention after the White House posted a doctored image of Nekima Levy Armstrong's arrest. Take a look at your screen on the left. It's a photo shared by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, showing Levy Armstrong in handcuffs with a blank expression on her face. And less than 30 minutes later, the White House posted this altered image on the right, showing her crying. The post did not disclose that the image had been changed. This morning, more questions after Columbia Heights preschooler Liam Ramos and his father were taken into ICE custody earlier this week. The Department of Homeland Security says that agents tried to get Liam's mom to take the boy, but she allegedly, quote, refused and abandoned him. Liam's family denies those claims, accusing agents of using Liam as bait to try to draw the family out of their home. The family's attorney says that Liam and his dad entered into the U.S. at a port of entry legally in 2024 through a CBP-1 immigration app and are in the process of seeking asylum.
They were following all the established protocols, pursuing their claim for asylum, showing up for their court hearings, and posed no safety, no flight risk, and never should have been detained.
The DHS says it was a targeted enforcement to detain Liam's father. We could not find any criminal history or pending charges for him here in Minnesota. Well, as today's strike calls for ICE to leave the state, Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino says there's no timeline for when Operation Metro Surge will end.
We're going to continue conducting that mission. We're not going to put a date or a timeline to stop this mission. This mission's ongoing until there are no more of those criminal illegal aliens roaming the streets of Minneapolis.
Is there a number, though? You have to have a file.
There is a number, and it's called all of them.
Now, Bavino went on to say he's more concerned about the safety of Americans than he is with numbers. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Department of Corrections is calling out Homeland Security, accusing them of not being honest about how the agencies have been working together. DOC Commissioner Paul Schnell says that DHS continues to make inaccurate and misleading claims. Now, one of those claims is that more than 1,300 individuals with ICE detainers are in Minnesota's custody. And ICE detainers are a request to law enforcement agencies to let them know before they're released and hold them 48 hours past their scheduled release. In Minnesota, state law prohibits law enforcement from holding someone beyond their release based on an immigration detainer.
DHS has repeatedly claimed that there are more than 1,360 individuals with ICE detainers in Minnesota custody. Despite requests, DHS has provided no data source, no tracking methodology, no jurisdictional breakdown, and no time frame explaining how their numbers were produced.
Now, Schnell says that DOC staff called every single jail on Monday, and when he reviewed their numbers and state prison numbers, Schnell says there were only 301 individuals with an ICE detainer. Schnell says that they've repeatedly reached out to DHS to work this out, but they have yet to hear back. Well, Vice President J.D. Vance is back in Washington this morning after visiting Minneapolis yesterday. The vice president held a private roundtable with federal law enforcement and local business leaders. Speaking to the press, Vance defended the work of ICE. Earlier this week, some local law enforcement leaders claimed that U.S. citizens and even their own off-duty police officers have been racially profiled. Our Danny Spiewak asked the vice president about that.
Earlier this week, local law enforcement accused federal agents of racial profiling. Why are there so many U.S. citizens being caught up in this operation?
Well, I think your question assumes something that's not necessarily in evidence, which is that when there are American citizens who have been caught up in some of these enforcement operations, very often it is people who have assaulted a law enforcement officer.
Now, after his remarks, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey pushed back on Vance's claims.
Clearly, what we are seeing on our streets right now is discriminating only on the basis of race. Anybody can see with their own two eyes what's going on.
Vance also addressed the president's threat last week to invoke the Insurrection Act, which would allow the federal government and troops to patrol here in Minnesota. He said he doesn't believe there's a need to invoke the act. This morning, state investigators are sharing more about their investigation into last week's shooting involving an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The BCA says it responded to the scene on Minneapolis' north side, where a federal agent shot a man in the leg during an arrest attempt. The agency says it couldn't finish its investigation that night because of the protests. The BCA says the FBI is doing their own investigation, but federal officials haven't shared the officer's identity, allowed the BCA to talk with him, or said whether he was wearing a body camera. Let's get to our nation's capital now, where special counsel Jack Smith says he will not be intimidated. Smith is defending his investigation into President Trump in his first public testimony before Congress. Now, Republicans say the probe was politically driven, leading to raised voices and angry clashes. NBC's Alice Barr has the details from Washington.
Hi there. In his testimony, Jack Smith was adamant he would bring the same charges again under the same circumstances, whether the former president was a Republican or Democrat.
In a sometimes combative hearing on Capitol Hill, former special counsel Jack Smith standing by his past investigations into President Trump.
Our investigation developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump engaged in criminal activity.
The two federal cases on the president's handling of classified documents and interference in the 2020 election results, both scrapped before he re-entered the White House. But Republican anger over what they believe was unfair targeting continues.
It was always about politics. And to get President Trump, they were willing to do just about anything.
Democrats rejecting that.
For us, it's all about the rule of law. and who's going to stand by the rule of law and who's going to oppose it.
While on social media, President Trump called Smith deranged and said, quote, hopefully the Attorney General is looking at what he's done.
Do you believe that President Trump's Department of Justice will find some way to indict you?
I believe that they will do everything in their power to do that because they've been ordered to by the president.
Smith adding,
I will not be intimidated.
Republicans also accuse Smith of spying on GOP lawmakers for seeking their phone records.
The egregious abuse of power.
Smith said the records that did not include content of calls were necessary to determine the president's contacts during allegations he sought to delay the January 6th election certification.
My office didn't spy on anyone.
Police officers injured defending the Capitol on January 6th were in the room and visibly frustrated throughout the hearing.
Those police officers have also spoken out against President Trump's decision to pardon roughly 1,500 people charged in the January 6th Capitol riot. Smith warned that those convicted of assaulting police officers that day are dangerous to their community. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Stick with us. More news and weather coming up after the break.